Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Valley Beth Shalom Online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this morning by my dear friends and teachers, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Marc Gellman of Golf Digest. And this morning we've gathered for Torah study. I certainly hope that you're taking very good care of yourself during this very, very trying time and staying well. And whether you're participating in the events going on outside or staying home, sheltering at home, you're taking good care of yourself. This morning, it's our opportunity to open the Torah and to spend some time with some ancient sources. We're in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, the third parsha. It's called Behaalotcha. It begins in Numbers chapter 8. And it begins with the commandment to God, from God to Moses and Aaron, to light up the menorah. The menorah was a 7-branch candelabrum that stood in front of the Holy Ark, in front of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that Moses and the people built in the desert. We call the word menorah, we sometimes call a Chanukiah menorah, but that's a different kind of menorah, because that's a 9-branched candelabrum, specifically for the Hanukkah holiday. This candelabrum was the light that stood in front of the Mishkan, and it's represented in the contemporary synagogue by the Ner Tamid. It has a tremendous amount of symbolic value, and the fact that the reading begins this week with the menorah is a signal to us that this piece of art, this piece of sculpture, this beautiful object has something to say to us as we begin the journey from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. Marc, tell us about this menorah. What's unique about it?
Well, I've sort of had this obsession with what are called clay kodesh, which is the sacred objects that used to be on the Temple Mount. And I think I was interested in them because my teacher, Nelson Glick, was this great biblical archaeologist, and he had a fascination with the Temple Mount and the clay kodesh. But I'm also fascinated by each of them because nothing could be more distant from our Judaism than these objects. We don't have physical objects in present-day Judaism very much. In fact, it's prohibited in Orthodox synagogues to even have replicas of these sacred objects in the synagogue. And although many synagogues have menorahs, the actual law by the rabbis, the takanah that they passed, was that you couldn't have the menorah from the Mishkan. You couldn't have the 7-branch menorah. You had to have a 6-branch menorah, which never existed, because then you weren't really representing it. And so I'm fascinated by things that seem irrelevant but really aren't. And if we look at the menorah, we see an example of how something that has disappeared from Judaism could, I really hope, reappear in its spiritual essence. That's the idea. So we begin with the command, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. So this is to Moses, a command. Daber el Aaron v'amarta alav. So you speak to Aaron, although really it's Bezalel who's going to make this, the craftsman. Behaalotcha et hanerot al mul pnei hamenorah. It means, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps, they have to give light al mul pnei hamenorah. Now this is an interesting phrase because it's ambiguous. What does it mean they should give light al mul, opposite, on the face of the opposite the face of the menorah? It's hard to even translate it into proper English. But and Rashi, the interpreter from Torah in the 11th century, says, and the other rabbis, they try to figure it out. And because it seems to be saying, when you light the lights of the menorah, they should all form a light opposite the menorah, a light. And Rashi said it meant that they would weave the wicks of the 7 oil lamps together so that they would burn with one flame. How that even happened, I don't know, and he didn't explain. And Nelson didn't think that was a reasonable idea, particularly since the architecture of the menorah looks like a different solution, which is the menorah was a single post with 3 branches going across it, making 3 lights on one side, 3 lights on the other side, and 1 light on the top of the center post. His idea, and I teach this in his name, was that the menorah swiveled, that the arms swiveled around the central post. So think of it this way: if you have the 3 lights, and my very large head is the 6th one. If you light them and you look face on at the menorah, you've got 7 lights. But watch this. This is my show and tell here. If you light them this way, then all you see is 1 light, plus my big nose. That's all you see. So the idea was that the menorah was not viewed the way we see it in pictures, which is the 6 side branches and the center branch. It was actually viewed edge on as a single light. And that is the lesson. We're commanded by God through Isaiah, to be a light to the nations. A light, a single light, not lights to the nations. And when you look at Judaism, it's not Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, New Age. These divisions mean nothing. We were looking at the menorah the wrong way when we look at something and divide it. And the same, I would say, is true with what's happening in America right now, where, oh, this is the Black community, this is the white community, this is the privileged community, this is the educated community, these are the people who are poor, these are the people who are rich. If we look at America as warring tribes, as different branches, if we look at Judaism as different denominations, if that's our principal datum of understanding, that we're all on different branches and all on different tribes, then there's no way to have a single light. There's no way to have a single light in America, no way to have a single unified light in Judaism. So Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmani in Berachot 55a says, Lo marin hadavar ela hir horei libo. No, we do not see things the way they are. We see things the way we are. So that idea is so powerful to me from the menorah, that what we need to do right now in America, what we need to do right now in Judaism, what we need to do right now in our lives is to swivel the menorah. And whatever we're thinking of, to think of it as a single unified flame. Don't think of your family as the kids and the parents. Think of your family as a single flame, just our family's flame. And then we're all part of that flame. But if we're this way, if we see the world this way, then we aren't part of anything. We're just attached somehow down below, and that's not enough of an attachment. So that's the lesson that I take from something that's otherwise gone, melted, taken by the Romans and the Arch of Titus, and gone from view, gone from memory. But it's not gone from my view, and it's not gone from my memory, because I am swiveling the menorah. And can I have an amen?
Amen, brother. Amen, brother. Amen, brother. I found the menorah a very interesting symbol. I found a drasha for it in a slightly different, a very different drasha in a book by a wonderful Bible scholar named John Levinson. He pointed out that if you look at the Garden of Eden story, in the Garden of Eden story, there is this tree of life, and this tree of life is the tree of immortality. The tree of life is the tree that it's what every human being wants most in the world. And Adam eats from the other tree, from the tree of knowledge, and God throws him out of the garden because God doesn't want him to get him to the tree of life, which is such an interesting symbol, which means, you can imagine immortality, but you can't get to it. You can imagine eternity, but you can't get to it. But what's amazing, of course, is that God doesn't destroy the garden, nor does he destroy the tree of life. If he really didn't want people to get to the tree of life, he would have destroyed it, take it out of the world altogether. But the fact that it stays in the world, and the image, of course, is the beautiful image is that you have the garden, and there's a gate to the Garden of Eden, and there's an angel who has a fiery turning sword stationed at that gate. Now, just come with me for a minute on a little walking tour. I want to take you to the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Eden Avenue. That's here in LA. If you're in New York City, it's Park Avenue and Eden Street. And you stand on, or if you're in Chicago, it's State Street. You're standing on the corner and you look down and you can see the gate of the Garden of Eden. So you can see the tree. It's in the middle of the garden. It's the biggest tree in the garden. You just can't get there, which is a symbol for the idea that you can imagine immortality. You just can't get there. But wait, as they say in television, there's this sword and it's on fire. So as I'm standing back, the two images superimpose one upon the other. And now it looks like the tree is on fire, but the tree never burns up. Now, where do I know that image from? A tree on fire that doesn't burn up. That's what calls Moses to his mission. That's the burning bush. It's the tree of life that says, I need you to go in the world and rescue my people because I want this people in the world who brings life to the world. And then when Moses takes them out of Egypt and they come to Mount Sinai, God gives them this commandment, the one you're referring to, a menorah. And how is the menorah to be built? It's to be built out of solid gold, and it's covered with what? With leaves and flowers and fruits and nuts. Now you build a menorah with leaves and flowers and fruits and nuts, it looks remarkably like a tree. And when you light it up, whether you light it this way or that way, Marc's exactly right. Brilliant idea. But when you light it, what you get is a tree that burns and never burns up. So that the menorah is the remnant we have of the tree of life. It's the remnant of the tree of life, which is the eternal project of Judaism as a faith. How do you get into that garden and get to that tree without getting eaten by that angel? Right? And that's the question. And tree of life, Eitz Chaim, of course, is what you call a Sefer Torah. It's Eitz Chaim. It's the way into the garden. And the menorah represents that tree. And that becomes, as you know, the perennial symbol of the Jewish people. This six-pointed star that we all like so much, that's 17th, 18th century, and we stole it from the Pythagoreans. They were good at they were really good at triangles. And if you
I was going to say they were good at corners.
Right. And if you read Dan Brown's book about Jesus and his girlfriends, that's a different set of symbols. The perennial symbol that you find in the catacombs of Rome that represents Jewish graves in the catacombs underneath Rome is a six-branched menorah, 3 concentric circles with a branch down the middle. In illuminated manuscripts, it's always the menorah. Over the doorpiece of the Alta Neue Synagogue in Prague, the oldest synagogue in the world, it's a 7-pointed menorah, and right across the street from the Knesset is the menorah. That's the symbol of the Jewish people. Your job is to bring light, and the midrash of turning it this way and seeing us as one is a beautiful, beautiful midrash. So now the question is, okay, so if there are these material objects that carry symbols, what do we use today? Go ahead, Sherry, please.
Well, I just wanted to add a story that a few years back I went to Rome, and to feel how much the menorah is part of our story. When I went to the Arch of Titus, I was like overcome with this emotion when I saw it. And it surprised me because it really it was like part of my bloodstream and part of my cells that the menorah was taking me all the way back to the original Beit HaMikdash and to this moment. And I just know that the Star of David, while it's powerful, doesn't have that same significance, right? There's something in that. And the other thing is when we now have a Hanukkah and we put it in the door to Pirsomei Nesa, to really publicize the miracle, there's something very mystical and spiritual. And like you said, Marc, it's about unity and not about our differences, but about our similarities.
When I was in Rome, standing underneath the arch, taking the pictures that everyone takes, and noticed that somewhere on the arch, someone had spray painted Am Yisrael Chai. Now, I'm not endorsing graffiti, especially on ancient artifacts and monuments, but somehow that fit. Somehow that was like revenge, that wasn't entirely inappropriate. Let me ask.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Tell me if I'm wrong. My memory is that Zionists every year would, on Israel Independence Day, they would walk under the Arch of Titus in Rome. Italian Jews, Zionists, would march under the arch toward Jerusalem to show, you see, you may have taken the menorah, but we're still here, and we're walking under the arch, and we're walking toward Jerusalem, to the place where the menorah came from, which I think is also another act of spiritual revenge.
I want to ask just a derivative question, though, because I think it's suggested by this. So I appreciate the idea that we can look at a material symbol and draw the message from that material symbol. But that begs the question, we have so few material symbols in Jewish life. I mean, it's a sad thing to go to a Jewish museum and the only thing they show are, parochet, the art covers and a few spice boxes, and then you go to the Louvre and you see what they got, more than we do. The question is, though, if we create a mikdash me'at, a home, a holy place in the Jewish home. So two questions. One, what symbols have to be there? If I have young friends getting married, I want to give them Jewish symbols to fill their home. I want to make sure that they have a what. That's one of the questions. And the second question is, and this is odd, but it's a true question. It's something my people and I are working on at the synagogue. We're looking at recreating the high holidays this year because we're not going to be able to have the gatherings we normally have. And one of the things we're looking at is the possibility of a Rosh Hashanah Seder, new home rituals that will reflect the fact that we still want to celebrate the sanctity of this time of year, but we can't do it in the synagogue the way we normally do it. So what material symbols are we going to need to fill up a home with a sense of yontif, a sense of the holiday that bespeak the fact that this holiday is still so very precious to us? Give me the name. Give me something. I mean, every Jewish home, we want them Shabbos candles and a Chanukiah and a menorah, But then what new stuff do we want people to have?
Rabbi Marc, are you getting up? Was that?
Well, I got an answer to that, but Sherry, why don't you go first?
So what I often counsel couples is they're like, I want the standard Jewish home stuff. Like, tell me just the kit. I'll take the Kiddush cup, the challah cover, the challah knife, and what I tell people is two things. One, there isn't a standard, but there is a starting spot of which to grow your Judaica presence in your home. And that starting point should be for your whole lifetime. There's always a way to enhance or to chidur mitzvah, to make another mitzvah beautiful through Judaica. So people have said to me, I have a Kiddush cup, that's enough. I have a Chanukiah, right? It's like it's one and done. What I tell people is if it fits in one room and you have one, you're far from done. So a mezuzah belongs on a bedroom door in every room in the house, right? A Kiddush cup, your Judaica should be in your children's room and your grandparents' room and your parents' room. It shouldn't be, I go to my living room and there's my Kiddush cup, my menorah, my shofar, my etrog box. And now I'm getting pretty detailed. I promise you there's far more options than you think, but it's not one and done. It's a starting place. Kiddush cup, challah board, mezuzah. I love an etrog box because really, it's like super special. I love a kli, which is to wash your hands. I have all these other things. If you need me, you can email me and I'll tell you all the other Judaica. But don't think you need one and you're done. You're building a living, a mikdash me'at, a mini sanctuary in your home. And like the ancient temple, there was many artifacts and many symbols. So too should your home be full of them as well.
All right, let me just say, first of all, a confession of Vidui. I don't know, you might want to join me, Eddie, on this. 40 years of counseling, premarital counseling, never did I say to the bride and groom, and make sure you get an esrog box. Never. I never did it, never thought of it. So Sherre, you are my teacher, and I chatati, I never did it. But I had two things that may be of value. The first thing I did, and I did this for every bride and groom who I ever counseled, and I would say to them, here's the thing about Jewish stuff. First of all, you have to know where your Jewish bookstore is, because a Jewish bookstore is not a bookstore. It's a hardware store. It's a Jewish hardware store. And they have all this stuff, Kiddush cups and challah, knives and so on, everything that you need. So you need to find that. But the main thing I would say is to them is, I don't care how rich you are or how poor you are. I don't care how much money you have. And I don't care how much money you will have. But here's what I do care about. Whatever level you're living on, if you're living small or if you're living large, and all of us have had experience counseling people who are small and large, I said, whatever level you're at, the Jewish stuff in your house should be at that level. So if you have very lovely paintings and lovely furniture and lovely everything, but the Jewish stuff in your house is basically junk, it's basically cheapo stuff, that's not right, because it shows that you don't care about it. Your Jewish things, the Jewish objects in your home, should be as beautiful as the other things in your home. The second thing that I did with teenagers for 40 years is I would tell all my bar mitzvah kids, boys and girls, to go out and buy some jewelry. And they began to actually listen to me when I said that to them. I said, I want you to go out and buy jewelry. I want you to buy Jewish jewelry. I want you, if you wear a necklace, I'm not telling you you have to wear a necklace, but if you wear one as a regular thing, and I think you should have a Jewish object on it. You should have a chai on it, or a mezuzah on it, or a Jewish star or something. The idea that you're wearing something that shows you're Jewish, I think is a powerful thing. And so those are my contributions to Jewish objects. But I totally agree with you. We live in impoverished spiritual life as far as objects are concerned. We're like Jewish Quakers. We don't have a lot of stuff. And that is unfortunate. And I think it adds, unfortunately, but understandably, to the way people view Torahs and the way they touch them and kiss them and mutchu with them. And they become the only symbols that we have, the only objects we have.
Can I just give one tip for parents and families? When I was 3 years old, our parents gave us our first Judaica for our room beyond the mezuzah on the door. And it was a tzedakah box. And it was very powerful. And I did the same thing for my own children. And they each have a collection of tzedakah boxes in their room. And I can't tell you just what the power of putting of a tzedakah box in your child's room, that messaging is so symbolic that we are a people that give and elevate others. And it's not on your parents, but it's your responsibility. And as young as 3 years old, when they get their Hebrew letters and they get the sweetness, may each of you have the ability to either make a tzedakah box with them or to give them a tzedakah box, and each week before Shabbat to drop a few pennies and to share with them the opportunity of what it means to do repair in the world. So just a little tip for parents.
Yeah.
And not just the tzedakah box, but as the kids get older, we do this with bar mitzvah kids. You tell the bar mitzvah kid, choose a tzedakah. That's going to be your tzedakah for maybe this year, for the next year. send away to that organization. They'll send you a bucket of stuff. They all have brochures. Make a corner of your bedroom, which is your tzedakah corner. So if you want to give to the Jewish National Fund or the Jewish Federation or to the American Red Cross or to Greenpeace or whatever you're giving to, put it up in the corner of your bedroom so you'll always have a reminder, a very physical reminder, that this is the cause that I'm working for this year. This is where my loose change and my spare dollars are going to go. And that's a powerful reminder of a kid that you have a mission in the world. It's not just about the rock stars and the sports stars that you worship, but you have a mission to do something more profound.
Let me ask you about your grandmothers. Did you have grandmothers who had pushkis on their tables, who had the JNF blue box on their tables?
Didn't everybody of our generation have that?
I did.
My bubby had a series of pushkas up against the kitchen sink.
Really, a series?
Oh my God, she had 100 of them for yeshivas, for orphanages, for charities. I once said that, Bubby, I don't think these people are in business anymore because it's written in Polish. She says, I still give. So this was part of the way I was raised.
Eddie, I think your bubby knew my bubby because we had a series of pushkis, and before Shabbat, you put money into the pushki, and they were all the blue boxes. And then there was a time we would gather them all up and take them to be delivered with the little tins, right? It was really very much a part of my childhood visceral experience of what it meant to give tzedakah, and that it wasn't upon my parents, but it was upon me.
Yeah.
There was another piece that we did. We gave tzedakah boxes to all our college kids and all our bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah kids. And it was a part of a tzedakah family collective that we organized, which was that between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you have a family meeting, a family tzedakah collective meeting. We did this in our family, and we would empty the pushki with the coins. And of course, Betty and I would say we were contributing from our income this amount of money, and the kids who would do chores or babysit or do whatever, they had some money. And we put it all together, and everyone in the Gellman household had a vote on where we would distribute our tzedakah every year. And everyone had one vote, no matter how much they contributed. And the kids would always gang up on me, and they would always vote for animal charities, which was fine because my grandfather was a zookeeper and I love animals, and we raised guide dogs for the blind. So a lot of our charity went there, but everyone had a vote, and they had to explain in the meeting why they wanted the charity to go to that place, not just I vote for this. They had to know something about it. And I used to teach people about Charity Navigator, which is a very important resource if you're giving away money. It's an organization that ranks charities based on how much they give away and how much they use for administrative purposes. So those are all wonderful memories, and I think it's to the great glory and honor of the Jewish people that of the very few things we have, sacred things, the pushki, the charity box is one of them.
I want to say a word from mezuzahs. I think the idea of putting a mezuzah on a door is quite profound, because the first word in a mezuzah is shema, which means listen. And just underneath that word in the cloth, in the parchment, is the word Behaalotcha, which means love. So that when you come in from the world of business and the world of competition and the world of struggle, and you enter into the domain of home, of love and of support, you've got to stop and remember Shema Behaalotcha. You are here to listen and you're here to love. And that's the reason you come into that's what you're coming into the house for. So when I was a day school principal once in my life, and we had to put up mezuzot, and I started teaching this, I started researching this. So the tradition, of course, is to remember that there's a cloth. But if you hide it in a beautiful artistic box, you forget that there's a parchment inside. It's not a magical parchment. Maimonides is very, very clear about this. If you think that your mezuzah is going to protect your house from fire, burglary, or earthquake, you're mistaken. It's a reminder of who you are and what you are when you come in your house. So the mezuzah has to be visible, and it has to be at eye level for the person who lives in that room. So for little kids, we got a whole bunch of clear plastic mezuzot, and rolled the cloth backwards so that you could see the word Shema Yisrael on the outside. And we put stickum tape on it and told parents every year, you know how parents, when you measure your kid and they put how high you are and as you're growing up, and they sometimes do this next to the refrigerator. Don't do that in the refrigerator. Do that with the mezuzah. Every year on the kid's birthday or on Rosh Hashanah, pry off the mezuzah and put it up at the kid's eye level or his height or her height on the door. And the mezuzah now becomes the mark of the kids growing in the world. You know, and the mark that the mezuzah leaves on the door is the symbol of the kids growing up in the world.
Eddie,
Okay,
I love that.
Finish it for our viewers who may not realize why the mezuzah has to have the top tilted in, and the little midrash about that.
Because there were rabbis who argued. Can you imagine such a thing?
No.
And in this case, it was two 12th century French rabbis, Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, happened to have a father-in-law and son-in-law. One said it had to go like this, and one said it had to go like this. And if you go both, it doesn't look Jewish. So they decided to compromise and give you a tilt. So there's your idea, by the way. That's your menorah lining up again. For the sake of unity, you figure out a compromise. Sherry, go ahead, please.
I just want to add something. That was such a beautiful drasha about the mezuzah and using that as the growth spurt. London, who is my third child, we were remodeling her room when she was 7 or 8, and she was now a big girl, she was telling us. So she couldn't have little girl stuff in her room anymore. And she dragged me into the doorway, and she showed me the mezuzah, and she goes, we need to remodel that for a big girl too. And I love that idea that you grow the casing for the mezuzah is not anything in particular. It's the cloth, it's the paper inside. But the idea that she noticed that she wanted to be in a different room, and that mandated a different entry point for her Jewish identity. And so I do that across the boards with my kids. So as they progress in life, whether it's remodeling the room or graduating from high school, we change the casing of the mezuzah to mark that transition. You're muted.
I appreciate our conversation about the material culture of the Jewish people, but I want to turn now to another section of the Torah portion, because we'd be remiss if we didn't at least jump into this for a bit. It seems to me that there's a complete shift in temperament in the middle of this Torah portion. The beginning of the Torah portion contains this commandment to raise up and light the menorah. It contains the commandment, by the way, in the same artistic sense, to create silver trumpets that will be blown before the people. It has the story in chapter 9 of the tabernacle. On the day chapter 9, verse 15, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, was set up. The cloud covered it, the tent of the pact. The evening it rested. And it tells about the cloud of God resting over the Mishkan. And then as we finish this section, something is going to change. And here's what's going to change. We're about to leave. Chapter 10, verse 11. In the second year, the 20th day of the second month. So if you're writing that, it's 022002. Get the picture? 02, right? Here's the second half of the story. We have left Egypt. We came to Mount Sinai, spent 2 years at Mount Sinai. And now 02, chapter 2, we're about to make the journey to the promised land. The cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the pact, that is the Mishkan, the shrine of God. The Israelites set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sinai. The journey begins. And here's what's so remarkable. When the Torah is talking about the creation of the Mishkan and the erection of the menorah and the creation of the silver trumpets, it's also beautifully pristine, because that's what art is. Art is a domain of existence that is defined. And one of the ways it's defined is that it becomes it's controlled by the artist. The choreographer controls the dance steps. The conductor controls the music. The artistic director, the director controls the actors, and the actors are working off of a script. And it's also controlled. But that's not life. And the temperament at the beginning of the Torah portion is that beautiful artistic sense of intention, of deliberation. Now, not every piece of art comes out the way the artist wanted it. There's always contingencies that enter into the transaction. That's what makes art interesting sometimes. But it's more or less controlled. But now you enter the world of the uncontrolled. And what do we find in the world of the uncontrolled? Well, come with me to the very end of chapter 10. They marched from the mountain of the Lord a distance of 3 days. 3 days into the wilderness. What happens? Chapter 11, the people took to complaining bitterly before the Lord. About what? God was angry, and people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed, and there's a fire that's burning. And then it tells you what they complained about. This is a people that were slaves in Egypt, and their children were tossed into the Nile. This is a people whose elders were crushed under Pharaoh's oppression. Moses takes them out of Egypt, comes to Mount Sinai, introduces them to God. They meet God. They meet God. They listen to the voice of God. And yet what concerns them 3 days off of Sinai? The riffraff in their midst, asaf suf in Hebrew, which is riffraff. Asaf suf in Hebrew, riffraff in English. You get the picture? It's a mush of people. Felt a gluttonous craving. And Israel wept, and they said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we used to eat free in Egypt. The Hebrew is chinam. We didn't have to pay for it. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. You know, every night a midnight buffet with a chocolate fountain. We remember what a cruise boat Egypt was. And they and all now they had, all they got was manna. Yuck. And Moses hears them, and Moses loses it. He just loses. God became very angry. Moses was distressed. And in verse 11, you get the sense of Moses losing everything. He's tried so hard to reach this people's heart. And this is what happens. And Moses said, why have you dealt ill with your servant? Why have I not enjoyed your favor? Why did you lay the burden of this people? Like, why me, God? Why me? And then he uses an interesting metaphor, because it's actually a motherly metaphor. Did I conceive this people? Did I bear them? You should say, take them in your bosom and nurse them like you nurse an infant, right? Where am I going to get meat for this people? And then Moses says something astonishing. Verse 15, if you deal with me thus, kill me. Is it, you know, the death is suicide by God, suicide by prayer. Moses loses it. And it's a pathetic image. The leader who has such capacity and has gone through so much already with this people, he just has no more capacity. And the people show themselves to be so small, so spiritually small. What happened? Tell me what happens here. And the contrast between the pristine, the sweet, easy, peaceful temperament of the artistic creation of trumpets and menorahs and tabernacles compared to the ugliness of politics, the ugliness of human interaction, this image of the human person as so small, so physically and unspiritual, so uninterested in being anything more than an animal who eats. What do you make of this? And what do you do with Moses at this point? How do you save Moses at this point? All right, who'd like to go with this one?
Well, look, I think Moses tries something that none of the founders of any religion ever tried. And that is, there's the founder of a religion who is the pure, unassailable core of the teaching of the religion. And then, following the founder, there's the religious bureaucrats, to give it a name, the people who create the institutions that surround and support and sustain the teaching of the founder. In all other religions, other than Judaism, the founder is different than the bureaucrats. The only religion where the founder tried to be also the bureaucrat, to create the religion and the institutions of the religion, was Moses. And he realized that that couldn't be done, and that's the significance of this. For example, the Buddha, obviously the founder of Buddhism, Buddha didn't create anything. He just had the teaching. And the teaching was recorded by the Sangha, the community of monks, the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, the male and female monks. And they recorded all the Buddha's teachings in the Jataka legends. And then from there, they developed the rules of the community, of the Sangha, of the priest. And that's how Buddhism grew. First, the Mahayana, the Hinayana tradition, the Mahayana tradition. And the same is true in Christianity. Jesus didn't create Christianity. Jesus had the teachings. He was the founder. He didn't care about creating the institutions of the church. That was Peter, and it was Paul. And they were the ones who created the church. Only Moses tried this impossible task. It's a heroic task, but ultimately it's a self-defeating task. Because the qualities of the founder, the qualities necessary for a founder, are totally different than the qualities necessary for an institutional creator. Moses had the qualities of a founder. He was willing to listen to God. He was willing. God says it in this portion. He was in the complaint about Eldad and Medad prophesying in the camp. He says, I wish that all of God's people were prophets, but listen to me. Only all the prophets have heard from me, but only Moses has spoken to me face to face. So Moses was a true spiritual genius, but he wasn't a true institutional genius. Paul was an institutional genius. Paul goes to the Greek Isles and says to the Jerusalem church, you know, this thing with pork, it's not going to fly. We're going to eat pork because they're all eating pork. And guess what? Circumcision, when you're an adult male human being, not a good thing to sell. That's not a good thing to sell. So what we're going for, and I don't mean to trivialize Christianity at any level, is a phenomenal religion. My best friend was a follower of it. I'm just saying, the idea was conversion, you accept Jesus, all your sins are forgiven, got it. And that was a thing that they could go with. He understood that. Jesus didn't get that because he was out in the clouds and he was on the mount and giving the teaching. So that's my theory about what happened to Moses. He tried to do two things that no human being has ever been able to do.
Sherre, how do we save Moses? If you were counseling Moses at this point, if God said to you, Sherre Hirsch, go tell Moses what he needs to know about this moment and how to move forward in this moment, what would you counsel him?
So I just want to say first that, Marc, your read on the global perspective of religions and the role of the founder versus the role of the implementer is fascinating. And one could argue that Paul was the best marketer there ever was.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
As to your question, Eddie, which I think is really goes to the heart of every human, many, many times before this, as a reader of the Bible and as a studier of the Bible, I would have thought that Moses would have quit. There was ample opportunity to say, enough's enough, I'm out. And the irony of this parsha is that he watches them in the mess of their gluttony and run out and crave and in just being base humans. And that's what actually sets him off. And I think it tells us a few things. Sometimes we are in the midst of seeing humanity up close, and it makes us actually want to give up and literally, as he says, kill myself, right? We get to this place where we're like, is this what humanity is? And I know that many of us have felt that because I felt it a lot in my own life, like whether it's in interpersonal relationships or it's society as a whole, where I've just thought, I'm out, I'm done. This is where I quit. Like, end of story, close the curtain. And I think when Moses is telling us is that it's very human to when we see other human beings do things that are truly distasteful and truly upsetting, that the inclination to quit is human. But what's beautiful is he doesn't. And so what happens in the next parsha that really tells us that even with that inclination, you still have the fortitude to go on. and you must find it. And I think that's the great messaging. That's why you keep coming back every week to read the next section. It's the best written book.
We appreciate that. I'm just so interested in the source of that fortitude, in the source of his. He seems to just collapse. The loneliness of this man, and it'll continue in the next 3 parshiot, because Bamidbar doesn't let up. Each week it gets worse and worse, and you have a picture of a man who's so desperately lonely, and so desperate. He wants so much, not just to take the people to the promised land, but to find the promised land within this people. And they keep betraying his dream. And it's such a difficult task. You feel a genuine Rahmanis. The tradition understands him as the most self-realized human being who ever lived. And in some ways, he's the most tragic human being who ever lived.
Well, and I say that, I mean, many of my colleagues don't agree with me, but Bamidbar is my most favorite book. Because while we think that Genesis is all of the dysfunction of the humanity, really, Bamidbar is about facing obstacles and overcoming them. And what does resilience really mean? And what does grit really mean? And what does it mean to have leadership and to struggle with that? It really tells us a lot about who we are today and how we have relations with other people, whether at work or at home and in all different environments. So I don't know how popular I am, but Bamidbar has always been my most favorite book.
Well, let me just say one word about quitting. We're forgetting, I think, something, and that is Moses did quit. He did quit, and he did want to die. He gave up, and he never changed his mind. What happened was, in the midst of his quitting and getting ready to die and having God kill him, God came to him and said, I need you, I love you, I want you. And I don't want you to die, and I will stay with this people, and I will lead this people. And then Moses is convinced by God. So that's the key to it. The key to me is you quit until you hear God tell you in your heart, I still need you. And when you hear God say, I still need you, that overcomes your personal doubts. That means this is the point of faith. The point of faith is not just some inner happiness when you see birds chirping. It's in the depths of your soul, when you are without hope, when everything is going wrong. You believe that God will enter your life and tell you in one way or another, in these words or in other words, I love you, I need you, and I am with you. And that gives you a strength you do not have on your own. That's the key to the story of Moses. He didn't have that strength. It's Moses as a man of faith before God, who God gives him the strength. None of us have the strength to go on. What we do as rabbis over time is incomprehensible. The amount of different things we have to do, the fires we put out, the lives we try and adjust. I know that I couldn't do it, and I don't have the strength to do it. I never had the strength to do it. But I had the strength to believe that God would help me do it. And every time I would preach and before I would pray, I would say, God, give me the strength to speak your words. That's all I would want, to reconnect with those fountains of faith. That's what faith is. We model for people, and Moses modeled for the people. The fact that alone we cannot find a reason to continue. And we're put in Camus' point, that and Sartre's point that suicide is the only real question. But with faith, we are put into a world in which we are needed and valued and have purpose.
That's a beautiful way to end today, Marc. Thank you. Sherre, I also appreciate this book. And I imagine, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. My imagination, this book was authored by an older idealist who has been through the battles. And he wrote this book for the simple purpose to give the message that Marc just gave us, which is he doesn't want the young idealist to collapse in disillusionment the first time he meets the difficulty presented by the human material out of which you try to create a sacred society. You want to create a sacred society, that's a magnificent vision. but you got to know that the people you're building it out of are real people. And they're people who will complain about the food before they'll embrace a vision of justice. And that's part of what the idealist wants us to know. And he wants us to be able to find the fortitude to keep moving forward, even in the face of these obstacles. So I think is a wonderful way to think about what's going on outside. It's one thing to raise your fist and scream, justice now, and that's perfectly marvelous. It is it's an awakening. Hopefully, it's an awakening of the conscience of the country. But what has to happen, of course, next is the long and very difficult process of turning that into real social change, which demands of people, makes demands on people's lives. And that's going to be a much more difficult. It's going to be a slow, deliberative process. It's going to be a process with obstacles and challenges and reversals. And can we hold on to idealism without giving into frustration and to disillusionment? I want to thank Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Gellman for joining me this Shabbos morning. Wish you both Shabbat Shalom and a very sweet and quiet weekend. And we'll see all of you next week for Torah study. Thank you so much for joining us.